Much of the public had lost faith in anyone involved in forest management. What they didn't know was that for many years, professional foresters of both government and industry have been calling for a more sustainable approach to managing forests. The University of Toronto, which began its forestry program in 1908, was graduating young foresters in the 1970s ready to take on the challenge.
I first became involved in forestry in 1973, September, when along with 120 other students, I stood in line at the Faculty of Forestry at the University of Toronto to sign up for the forestry program. And I enjoyed the program so much that I stayed and did a master's degree and a PhD in habitat management. And I've been involved in forestry ever since. As far back as I can remember, forestry has always, in my opinion, had a very strong conservation ethic. And that was one of the things that was so appealing. We learned that the forest is much more than just the trees and the wood, that the forest is a community of interacting organisms. And when we manage the forest, we're managing a community. We're managing an entire ecosystem.
In the 1960s, the post-war policy of managing solely for sustained timber production evolved into a policy of managing for multiple users. For the first time, the needs of other users of the forest would be recognized in forest management plans. By the 1970s, the young cohort of foresters trained in ecology and biology would begin to implement a more ecosystem-based approach to forest management. For them, like society in general, forests were much more than pine trees and portages.
The idea of how forests should be managed, it was an evolving idea because there were all sorts there was lots of new research being done. There were people with new ideas about how we should look at the forest, more like an ecosystem, more like a community rather than just only a source of wood. So the whole process of providing habitat for wildlife through forestry has evolved step by step since way back then.
The single biggest change in the 1960s and 70s was the introduction of tree marking, because that took the decisions straight to foresters and technicians, making good decisions on the ground about what to cut, what to leave, how to protect wildlife, and how to protect forests. And that's a program that we have continued with to this day, and it's a great legacy of that time of the 60s and 70s.
This was the era of featured species management where the thinking was, well, let's select a few species to focus on, and maybe if we make the right selection, the right choice, these featured species will sort of capture the requirements of all wildlife on the landscape, and we'll be able to, in a manageable way, sort of provide for them all.
Out of this new science arose the need to integrate other values into the forest management planning process, not just recreational use, but non-timber values like wildlife and aquatic habitats, soil and water protection, and ecological values like old growth. This new approach was called Integrated Forest Resource Management. Perhaps the earliest large-scale application of integrated forest resource management was the development of a master plan for Algonquin Park in 1974. While logging would continue as part of the park's original mandate, the new master plan would protect and enhance a long list of other values. The Algonquin Forest Authority, a Crown agency, was created specifically to manage the forestry activities in the park.
In our forest management plan, we have certain areas of concern, and one of them is canoe routes and portage routes and campsites. So we try and stay away from those areas from the Canada Day weekend to Labor Day weekend, just to sort of protect that sort of, aesthetic value and, the noise and that sort of thing.
So forestry is only permitted within a portion of Algonquin Park, within the recreation utilization zone. It makes up approximately 63% of Algonquin Park, but when you factor in other no-cut reserves, rocky areas, other inoperable areas, it really is about 51% of Algonquin Park is eligible for forestry.
While the general public welcomed the changes, the local forest industry and the people who worked for it were concerned about maintaining their timber supply. Many of them relied on a wood supply from Algonquin Park to stay in business and provide employment to the people living in the surrounding communities. Every single job here is 100% dependent on the wood that comes from Algonquin Park. But there's a catch to that, in that it makes it that much more important to us. It makes every person here, their livelihood and their children's livelihood, because everything is multi-generational. We depend on Algonquin Park.
So the AFA was brought in. Now I was very young. I remember sitting around our kitchen table, listening to the press releases and listening to my father being interviewed and trying to explain that we weren't here to decimate Algonquin Park. We were here, it was our backyard. Nobody had more vested interest than we did.
The sawmills lost their timber licenses in the park, but they did not lose their supply of wood. The newly appointed Forest Authority was required to ensure that each company received its fair share.